Hi everyone and welcome along. Today is a channel first. Today we are painting a tutorial that has been voted for by my members of my YouTube membership. So that means I set a poll at the beginning of the month and the wonderful people who have signed up to become members of my channel got to vote, and it was between a spring flower arrangement and some detailed vegetables. And look what we've chosen. So here we go. This is what we're painting today. I'm going to put the reference photo up on the community dashboard on the channel if you want to have a look and use the photo as reference. And of course, if you are interested in joining the channel, then all you need to do is head down just beneath the video here. There's a little button that says join on it. If you click that, you'll see just for £2.99 a month, you get so many lovely little perks to really support the channel. But back to this, it's a lovely spring arrangement, perfect for a card, Mother's Day, journaling, just celebrating spring in general, and great to have a go at painting in a full arrangement of flowers. Sometimes it's really hard with watercolour to know at what point you put which bit in. Well, thanks to the YouTube members, we're going to find out today. So grab your paints and let's get started. So here I have my 8x6" bit of paper, and I'm going to begin by just plotting out my piece. So I want to make sure it's nicely centered on the page. So I was just doing a sort of dashed sort of halo of where the flowers are going to come out to, and then also, very importantly, sort of trying to balance up the top and bottom of the piece so that my vase, which is quite a large kind of metal bucket container thing, feels quite centered as well. So I'm going to begin by getting that curve in, and then I can get that drawn. And then from there I can start to sort of get the sense of the stems coming up, but I don't like to draw too much, you know me. But the vase is always quite an important one, so we sort of sketch that in nicely. And then the only thing I would like to get in here is I want to put in some little narcissus, little mini daffodils, and they're so pale, and I want to make sure that they're sort of showing up on top of the greenery and things. So what I am going to do is I'm going to just place in some little circles, ovals, and get a sort of rough outline of these flowers in. So I'm just getting that oval in, which means then I can place in my petals and work out the sort of rough size and shape of what I'm then going to mask in masking fluid. So I draw these in, and then we will paint them in masking fluid and let that dry. The masking fluid I'm going to use is Winsor & Newton Art Masking Fluid. It's always been the one that I've found works really well. But one thing that I will make sure of before I paint in my masking fluid is I want to just knock back the heaviness of the pencil in general everywhere we go. So that's all we need. We'll mask those up and then we can get painting. So my masking fluid is now tacky to the touch, so it's nicely dried. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some lemon yellow, and I'm just going to sort of knock it back a little with some buff titanium. We'll just make it a little less zesty. And I'm going to paint in some lovely tulips and some sort of bigger petally flowers, you know, like with a centre and a petal. But I'm going to begin with some tulips, and actually maybe we'll get a little bit of yellow ochre in there. I think that might be quite nice just to, there we go, that's the colour I'm looking for. So we're going to paint this in a somewhat loose style. What I tend to be known for is a controlled loose style, which is where we sort of capture the essence of plants and flowers, but we're not going fully abstract and loose. So I'm just creating this sort of U shape, a bit of a horseshoe shape, to then be able to use a few brush strokes. There we go, a little horseshoe, and then a few brush strokes in the middle. I'll get another one in there. It doesn't matter if they sort of overlap and bleed into one another just a little bit. So we're just building up this composition. And so this is very exciting because this is the first of my YouTube membership having a vote on what they would like to see me paint. So on Patreon we have a feature called You Choose YouTube. I'm just going to change my colour now a little bit to be a little less yellow, and I'm going to paint in some more flowers around the edge at the back. So we have You Choose YouTube. So I've just got buff titanium here. And that means every month on Patreon they can come up with suggestions and ideas, and I will fit in a sort of average of about 4 of those every month, as many as I can do. And then what I thought would be lovely, because we've now got YouTube membership, which is only $2.99 a month, and you get some really fun little hand-painted emojis to use in your comments. You get long form versions of my very popular social media flower tutorials. But you also get a vote between 2 of the more popular suggestions that have come from my patrons. If I can't fit all of them in, it's down to my YouTube members to have their say. And that's lovely to know that you're able to have a bit of ownership over the content that I create on here, which it's all, you know, it's all about you. We couldn't do this without your support. And so that's why we launched YouTube membership, to help keep the channel going, but also say a big thank you to all of you for your support, and give you something back even more than what we already give back with our tutorials. So today is the first of those vote results. We had a spring floral arrangement like this, and also the other vote was for some vegetables, some sort of spring veg, detailed veg tutorials. Now, if you're like, oh, I would have wanted the veg, well, you know what you've got to do. Just head down underneath this video here, and you'll see a join button, the word join. Click that, and you can find out exactly what you get when you become a YouTube member and you support the channel. And you'll see just underneath our video as well a little parade, a hit parade of our YouTube members as another thanks to them for supporting us. Okay, I'm going to now just paint in a nice little sunny yellow central dot that I'm sort of imagining will bleed out a little bit, but that's absolutely fine. We're building up our composition slowly. So I'm going to let this dry and we'll go on to the next stage. I'm now going to move on to my pink tones. I'm going to take some permanent rose and a little bit of Imperial Purple. Just want to make it a little bit more plummy. Oh, that's nice. And I'm going to paint in, a few more tulips. So I'm sort of layering up now on top of these lovely sort of paler, creamier colours that we had. And that's the whole thing with watercolours. If you start off lightly, then you will have much better chance of allowing your paints to show up on top of each other. So I'm being sort of quite truthful to the reference image that my YouTube members voted on. And we'll put a picture of this in the community post, in the sort of the community dashboard. So I'm now going to put in some hyacinths. So if I just sort of do a little main stem like that, and then from there I'm going to just use my water on my brush to sort of paint out some little sort of fanned petals, because a hyacinth has got all these little trumpety petals. I will get a little bit more colour here. They sort of fan out like little trumpets and make this almost like a loofah style shape. So I'm going to pop in another one just here, maybe a little bit more high up. So using the wetness and also relying on the fact that the colours underneath are fairly dry. I mean, I need to try and be quite nimble with the brush and not be overworking it. But those little bits of unpainted space are what it's all about. So I'll just try and get down to the bottom of my purple line there, pinky purple line. And I'll just place in one or two, maybe a little one just there. And maybe one just sort of popping out the side. In fact, I think there is one popping out the side. And so the whole time you can be keeping an eye on the general shape, the overall shape of the piece. Next, I've just put some Cerulean Blue into my palette, and I'll put a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty good. I might get a bit of French ultramarine in there as well. I'm doing Muscari next. Now, these have only just been painted in. They might still be a little damp, but I don't mind too much. What I want to do is start to... There we go. Yeah, there's a little bit of a bleed and a blend, but I quite like that. I am going to paint in these little soft little cones, dotty cones of blue. So you can see how we've gradually gone through the colours and gone stronger and deeper. But I haven't had to be really concentrated with any colours just yet, which is cool. But everything is in its sort of basic wash stage at this point. So Muscari is a smaller, shorter flower in general, so we're not going to see a huge amount up around the top, but I will put in a few just sort of down in the centre. Now you might wonder why I sort of chose to put masking fluid down just for the narcissus and not for anything else. Well, the narcissus are going to be really pale white, and I felt like the rest of this piece is going to be able to survive a bit of green sort of overlapping on it, but I think the crispness and the contrast of that pale narcissus is going to work really well. This is all dried now, so I can start to add in the green. And so I've got green gold and sap green here, which are going to be my two key colours. And I did a bit of masking fluid there as well, so that the base of my vase, or the rim of my vase, would just be protected, so I could sort of paint quite freely into it. So I'm going to start just sort of sending up shoots of green. I'm starting with the green gold, being just sort of casually connecting these plants if I feel like there's an obvious line. We've also got some big gaps, so I'm going to want to put in some leaves, especially we've got tulips, and we've got some tulips have got these lovely large leaves, and then I'm just going to carefully place in just a few more. And now I'm going to use this as a sort of darkening colour. Size 2 brush feels like quite a good choice at this point. Okay, and now I'm going to start to sort of place in a few more sort of leaves and stems with the green, or leaves that might come up. And we're going to definitely have instances where some of our flowers that we've painted are going to be sort of painted over the top of, but that's okay. Just try and keep your brush strokes nice and sort of light, and keeping them moving. Essentially, we want to just start filling these spaces a bit more, but keeping it quite nice and fluid. I'm now using deep sap green to just create some even more sort of low lights and little shadowy sections for the greenery. I'm also just making sure that there's enough colour sort of surrounding the edges of the little narcissus flowers, that when I rub the masking fluid off, I'm going to still be able to see them defined like that. So I'm really happy with how this is shaping up. It's still got a nice sort of simplified feel to it, but it is looking quite sort of clear in terms of what things are. So now I can just enjoy placing in some quite simple little sort of streaks of detail on the piece. So if I just take some slightly sort of deeper, stronger colours, so here for example I've got Alizarin Crimson, and just with my size 0 brush I can sort of create some details on the petals here, but also what I quite like to do with tulips is actually paint in like the interior of the flower as well, just with that darker colour. And if I add a little bit of Imperial Purple to that colour, that works out as quite a nice little colour for the hyacinths as well. So you can see I'm just taking the sort of edge of the hyacinth here and just sort of curling the brush. It's nothing too clever, but in a way it's very clever because it's giving a really nice impression in quite a simple manner of a more sort of three-dimensional hyacinth. So for every flower here, I'm just going to look at the colour, think of what in my palette is just a slightly more sort of concentrated or in-depth version of the colour. So for the Muscari, I'll take some French Ultramarine and just place in a little sort of up the edge, up one side, to give it that bit more of a rounded, more three-dimensional shape. And you could also just sort of tidy up the shape as well if you want to add a few extra little bits. But just keep it nice and light in terms of, when I say light, just not being too sort of heavy with the colours, overworking it, doing too much. You don't need to do too much, but one thing you can do if you want, you could just always add in a little dash of colour here or there. That's always quite nice to do. It's all about evening up the shape. And now, once that has dried, I am going to rub off the masking fluid and rub out that pencil up there. So you can see the narcissus have been unmasked. Sounds much more dramatic than it actually is. And I'm just going to take some of the Buff Titanium Lemon Yellow mix, dilute it down and paint the petals in like that. And as I was saying, I was using slightly darker, stronger colours to sort of layer up some detail on the other flowers. Well, for these ones, I just added a little Paynes Grey to Buff Titanium to get that colour. So I will probably use that as well on the narcissus. But we have also got the small matter of the vessel, the vase, to think about as well. So we'll get these painted in and we can rub out the masking fluid on the vase, and then we can paint that in a lovely, it's this lovely sort of metallic finish. So, but before we do that, I'm going to make use one more time of that masking fluid. If I get some shadow mix, just some burnt sienna, Paynes Grey, and just paint in the shadowy interior. Which is just really helpful, and we'll just use a little bit of that for one last sort of bit of shadow. It's so nice to have masking fluid sometimes for things like this, just let you paint really freely. Okay, we'll let that dry and then we can come back and finish off. So we've got ourselves a pretty perfect, neat line from peeling off the masking fluid. And now we need a nice metallic tone. So I'm just getting a bit more burnt sienna in there. Right, so I'm going to paint in, I'm going to leave that tiny little rim of unpainted space there. I'm going to come down the side. Now I'm left-handed, so I find it easier to come from this side, but you might find it easier to come from the other side. And I'm going to take a larger brush. I'm going to take a size 6 brush. And get my sides painted. And I want to just sort of draw the colour in from the sides essentially and end up with just a little bit of unpainted space in the middle. And then you can see that my sides are a bit wonky at the moment. Take that stronger, darker colour And whilst these edges are still just a little wet, I can just refine it a little bit. And now I'm going to do a little bit of a detailed band around the middle of it, but first we'll just go full circle with that. And then once this is sort of dried a little more, we can put a layer of detail sort of on the rim. But I get a bit more burnt sienna and just a bit more solid Paynes Grey, and let it dry. Then we can do the last little bits. But whilst that dries, because the great thing is when you're painting watercolour, if you can have a few things on the go at once. So I put in that little bit of shadow on the Narcissus Floral. Can now just take a little bit of Hansa yellow medium and finish those off. And that looks really nice. And all those flowers are really very simple, but together it looks like a lovely, quite sort of detailed piece. Okay, so now, given my pot just a little bit more time to dry, I'm going to paint in a little band of burnt sienna. That's not bad. And the piece is still a tiny bit damp, which I quite like. So you might get a little bit of a bleed. But I quite like that. So I'm going to put in another band down here, and then I'm going to fill in the middle with some darker Paynes Grey. So we're going to finish off with some detail. I've got my 4/10 brush and I've just painted a fine line of concentrated Paynes Grey just there. So we've got that little unpainted space, looks like a bit of a shine, but also what I want to do is just in places just sort of paint into it a tiny bit with a little bit of the diluted colour. And I can do the same sort of, you don't have to do the whole line, you could just do sort of as long as your brush lasted or your hand lasted. But it's these tiny little details that many people would just go, oh, I'm done now, that actually really make a piece sort of come alive, and is just getting those little details around the edge as well. The rigger brush is also brilliant for this. The long, where is it? There we go. This would be good. I've just decided I'm going to just stick with my my 4/10 brush, because I do love my 4/10 brush. And then if you ever feel like any of your lines are a bit heavy or a bit wonky, you can just take a slightly larger brush, smooth them with a clean wet brush, just maybe on the underside, and that works really nicely. So the last thing to do is a little bit of shadow, because otherwise this piece is just sort of floating in the air. So if I decide my shadow, my light's coming from here, my shadow's here, I'll first pop a bit of shade on the pot itself, and maybe just a little bit sort of down there, and then I can just place some and that's just a glaze of Paynes Grey and burnt sienna. It's up to you really, sort of how sort of specific you want to be with your shadow. I've got flowers in there, so that feels quite nice. So that is our first ever YouTube membership chosen piece. If you want to join us for $2.99 a month and get a membership badge, which is a cute little paint tube which changes colour the longer you've been a member, you get hand painted emojis to use in your comments, you get long form tutorials which are only available on social media in very short cuts. So that's like our flower painting tutorials that you'll have seen a lot of. If you feel like those go a bit fast and you'd like a slightly longer, slower version, then YouTube membership is the place to come. And then finally, you will get a vote each month on a tutorial that we create on YouTube. And it's all in aid of helping us carry on with this and keeping this as our full-time jobs. So we thank you so much for your support. And I just love being able to do this for my job, and I'm so glad it brings you so much pleasure too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!